My life in music really began at a very young age. I started to play the guitar at around 7 and actually began to study the guitar through private lessons at the age of 8. And I knew early on that music was going to be a central part of my life, because I was the kind of kid that always looked forward to the very next lesson. I would have my lesson and then look forward to the next Saturday when my lesson would happen. And I remember one of the disconcerting things for my teacher was that despite all of the assignments, I would never play exactly what was written on the page. I would always add something to it. And so he was constantly having to tell me to please play exactly what was there. And by the way, if you want to add these other things, why don't you think about the possibility of composing pieces, and we can talk about that. And that's all he needed to say to me. And it began this process of thinking about music, not just in terms of recreation, but of composing. And that started very early with me. His name was Robert Stein, and he would come to my home each week. And the lessons would often last several hours. I'm sure he had other students that he had to work with, but they became so special to me, and I cherish them to this day. I think of him fondly and often, actually, that he had such a significant impact on my life. And there's no question that I'm a professional musician today, because it all started very early with a very sympathetic and empathetic man who understood here was a creative young boy who could be nurtured and guided and allowed to develop actually rather rapidly. It got to a point where he felt that he couldn't offer any more instruction on the guitar, and so I started to work on the violin, and he was a wonderful violinist and a great teacher. And I also worked on the piano with him as well. So we began to broaden the number of instruments in our lessons, constantly with the idea of expanding my horizons musically in terms of the repertoire. He was really quite extraordinary that way. And I'll always be grateful, forever grateful to him for the opportunity to have worked with him those years as a young musician. There was actually lots of music in my house. My mother played the piano, and it turns out that my parents had a very extensive '78 record collection of many kind of popular hits from the 40s and the 50s, as well as symphonies and operettas. And I listened to a great deal of music. In fact, when I had my lessons, one of the pieces that was most important to me was the Dvorak Symphony. And I went to my teacher and said, look, I'd really like to play that on the guitar. So being the wonderfully engaged man that he was, the next week he came with all the main themes of the symphony to allow me to play that on the instrument. And I recall that beside the record collection that I would listen to constantly, my musical education was being expanded in a dramatic way by listening to the radio. My father helped me make a crystal radio set, and this was a radio that didn't have a battery, but would pick up only the strongest stations. And I would listen very late at night, and I was able to pick up some of the kind of extraordinary blues singers like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, who were playing in clubs in the south side of Chicago. And I would listen to this music all night long. I would pick up the Grand Ole Opry from Nashville. So I was getting a kind of music education, a kind of extraordinary education in terms of the kind of popular music, not only within the city, but in terms of urban blues, but a very diverse body of music. And I think it really clarified in my own mind, even as a young musician, about the diversity of influences that are going to impact on me as a musician and as a composer.